Have you ever wondered what happens when centuries of isolation and radiation meet in the swamps of Fallout 3? The area at the mouth of the Potomac River, known as Point Lookout, is populated by disfigured creatures. Thanks to the effects of radiation, black magic, and occult practices, insane victims of centuries of inbreeding pose a serious threat to any traveler. Almost immediately upon arriving in the Point Lookout, you'll encounter the Swampfolks, creatures that certainly evolved from humans. Their appearance alone raises many questions, and we'll explore the dark history behind their mutations. The swamps of the Lookout are far from major settlements. You can only get there by buying a ferry ticket. This vacation was not subjected to nuclear bombardment, and no experiments with the forced evolutionary virus were conducted here. The mutations that caused their hideous appearance were triggered by inbreeding. Small population of the swamps over time followed the primal instinct to reproduce, but due to their isolation from human settlements, the local community married and had offspring with their close relatives. Radiation, which got into the swamps in the form of contaminated water and microparticles carried by the wind, was absorbed by the lands for centuries and affected the environment, which eventually impacted all aspects of local life, thereby accelerating and possibly worsening the results of inbreeding, outcoming in genetic mutations. Even before the war, the population of Potomac was not particularly friendly or sociable. It is noted in the game that even before bombs fell, they led a secluded lifestyle. They stayed in isolation, were not friendly at all, and displayed aggression towards other people. 200 years later, apart from their appearance, not much has changed. However, their culture and customs have been influenced by something relatively recently. The Swampfolks worship a god named Tot, celebrating holidays in his honor, making sacrifices, and building altars. Their occult practices, which they blindly follow, were literally imposed on them by Constance Blackhole, an ancestor of Obadiah Blackhole, who still continues to control the Swampfolks. These imposed beliefs are reflected in their everyday life. It is obvious that on the swamps there is a problem with a territory suitable for farming and living, so they enclose and mark their land with totems and sculptures somehow related to their beliefs. Idols, which may be expressed in totems erected by the locals, most often consist of decapitated mannequins, plush toys, and in addition the remains of Brahmins and humans. One of the forms of totems, which they also use to signify ownership of the territory, are the bones and toys hanging everywhere from trees. Practices used by them as part of their religion remain poorly studied. However, what is known so far with confidence is that the cannibalism is a part of their daily life. Their aggression is not motivated by the goal of profiting from someone else's belongings, which can be understood by simply looking at them and their modest way of life. The lands of the swamp are not rich in diverse game, nor are they suitable for farming enough to satisfy their needs. So human meat, though, is not a main, but is still an integral part of their diet. The intelligence of the Swampfolks remains very low, perhaps even lower than that of a character with 1 point in the special attributes. They are quite capable of speaking, following traditions, building, farming, and using weapons, but nevertheless, they are often driven only by instincts, incapable of coherent speech, often pronouncing words with a very strange accent, and for 200 years they have not been able to improve their living conditions in any way. They are capable of stitching their wounds, as evidenced by the numerous stitches on their bodies, which indicates some medical skills and knowledge among some of them, and very low development does not prevent them from reproducing at a very rapid pace, which replenishes the diversity of genetic mutations in the gene pool of their society. In the game, there are 3 characters worth taking a closer look at. The very first and biggest representative of the Swampfolks is the Tracker, who is very similar to the Bruiser. He is about 2 meters tall, taller than the protagonist, completely covered in pockmarks, scars and stitches. He has very high health and damage, posing a serious threat. You can immediately notice a large number of tumors on him, disfiguring his head and deforming his arms. For example, his left arm is so overgrown with tumors that the Tracker can no longer use fire firearms. Since his fingers on his hands just can't pull the trigger, most often he is armed with an axe. During the battle, he often covers his head from bullets with an abnormally large hand, practically hairless on the head, with large ears, small eyes, and an unnaturally swollen belly. The shape of his head is significantly larger than normal and more resembles an oval that someone hit with a sledgehammer, leaving a dent. Trackers wear clothing that was possibly worn by their victims or other relatives before them, which may be the reason why it doesn't fit their stout body. By looking at his face, you can already say that his intelligence is not particularly high. The next representative of the Swampfolks is the Brawler. It is hard to say much about the degree of his mutations. He wears a tracksuit that almost completely covers his body, is about the same height as the protagonist, and his face and neck are completely covered in pockmarks and literally drowning in various tumors, indicating his belonging to the Swampfolks. One of his eyes may already not function properly, as the tumors block his view. Bruisers have less health than trackers and deal less damage. They are capable of shooting firearms and still communicate in slurred speech, which may be influenced by the massive tumors. Creepers and scrappers are the smallest inhabitants of the Potomac swamps. They are very skinny and partially hairless, capable of dealing little damage and have low health, posing no significant threat. If you do meet a scrapper, he is most likely to be paired with someone else, such as Bruiser or Tracker. Scrappers most often have a deformed jaw, eyes that diverge in different directions, and their overall head shape resembles a cube. They don't wear t-shirts, displaying their skinny body, which looks a bit odd considering their swollen belly. Most often they are armed with firearms. Little is known about the lifestyle and community of the Swampfolks. The game doesn't show female individuals, however they definitely exist. In case of the birth of a normal child, such as Kenny, a person without obvious defects, the Swampfolks will not be aggressive towards him, but neither will they consider him one of their own. The inhabitants of the Point Lookout can trade. In the game, there is Haley's hardware store, where the seller is a perfectly healthy and non-mutated person. He's quite intelligent and calmly conducts his business with the locals. They are not aggressive towards him, because Haley grew up in the Potomac area. The Swampfolk almost never use currency or cups in trade, preferring natural barter instead, exchanging one good for another. Most often they bring meat or weapons to Haley, and Haley himself also trades with mercenaries going to Lookout. Obviously, the life of the Swampfolk revolves around their own religion, sacrifices, and ongoing inbreeding, and for the most part, they probably eat what they can kill, such as people, swamp creatures, or other small animals. But they also grow some crops for food. You are unlikely to meet a Swampfolk alone, meaning that they live in groups, negotiating raids, hunting, patrolling, and making important decisions together. It is quite possible that their level of development has fallen to the tribal, where the role of the leader and priest at the same time is performed by members of the Black Hole family. Also, by chance, you might come across a crushed plane that fell during nuclear war. Unfortunately, the pilot could not survive. Wandering around, it becomes clear that he was able to land, but the locals attacked and killed him. The pilot's remains can be found nearby the crashed plane. A parachute will hang from the tree, and an axe, possibly used by trackers, will be stuck in its trunk. Under the canopy of this tree will be decayed body. Most likely, at that time, they had not yet accepted human meat as food, as evidenced by the intact skeleton of the pilot, with possibly skeletons of the ancestors of the Swampfolks nearby. And that's all for now. Don't forget to like this video, leave your comment, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell button.